I've been studying what happened after slavery ended, and what I found surprised me. Freedom didn't arrive all at once, evenly distributed across the country. It came into a world that was still dangerous, still hostile, still structured around inequality. The people who had been enslaved were legally free, but that's not the same as being safe. What I'm going to show you in this video are 3 commandments, 6, 7, and 8. But they weren't religious rules or moral guidelines. They were survival instructions, learned through experience, through loss, through watching what happened when someone made the wrong move. I want you to understand something fundamental. These commandments weren't written in books. They were whispered between family members, passed down in kitchens, taught through stories about what happened to neighbors. After emancipation, formerly enslaved people found themselves in a strange position, free in legal terms, but exposed in every practical sense. The structures that had controlled their lives for generations didn't disappear. They transformed. What emerged was a set of rules, and these rules dealt with protection. Protection of the body, protection of property, protection of behavior, because survival after slavery depended on all 3. And the first of these rules, Commandment 6, was about the most basic kind of protection, keeping yourself and your community physically safe. I need to explain what Commandment 6 actually was. Protect your body and your community. This wasn't about being cautious for caution's sake. This was about physical survival in a world where Black bodies were no longer legally owned, but were still treated as if they had no value. After emancipation, violence didn't disappear. It just changed its form. I've looked at the records from this period, and what you see is a consistent pattern. Freedom meant navigating a world where an accusation could be fatal, where self-defense could be punished more severely than the original attack, where being in the wrong place at the wrong time could cost you your life. The data is actually shocking when you look at it closely. Here's what this commandment taught: restraint, not weakness. And there's a crucial difference. I've spoken with historians who study this period, and they all emphasize the same point. The people who followed this rule weren't lacking courage. They were making calculated decisions. They learned to measure their words, their movements, their responses to provocation. The calculation was simple, but brutal. Courage without protection equals death. And not just individual death. One incident could bring consequences for an entire community. This is what made Commandment 6 so important. It wasn't just about personal safety, it was about collective survival. I want to show you how this worked in practice. Protecting the body meant avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Not every confrontation, sometimes you had to stand your ground, but unnecessary ones, the kind that could be sidestepped without sacrificing dignity. People developed an entire language around this: how to deflect, how to redirect, how to remove yourself from a dangerous situation without appearing to flee. What I find remarkable is how sophisticated this system was. It required reading social situations with incredible accuracy, understanding power dynamics instantly, knowing which battles could be fought and which ones couldn't. This wasn't passive acceptance. This was active strategy. Here's something that might not be obvious. Protecting the community meant understanding that one incident could bring consequences for many. I've read accounts where a single altercation in one town led to violence against Black residents across an entire county. This is why the commandment emphasized community protection as much as individual safety. The rule was passed down quietly, in 3 parts. Don't draw attention. Don't escalate. Don't give anyone an excuse. These weren't suggestions. They were requirements for survival. And what strikes me is how much awareness this required. How exhausting it must have been to live under this constant calculation. I've been trying to understand how these rules were actually taught, and what I've found is that they were transmitted through observation and quiet instruction. Parents didn't sit children down for formal lessons. They demonstrated through their own behavior. They told stories about what happened to others. They created scenarios and asked questions. What would you do if... This method of teaching was itself a survival skill. The rules couldn't be written down because that would create evidence. They couldn't be discussed openly because that might be overheard. So they were woven into daily life, embedded in family stories, demonstrated through example. The transmission was quiet, but it was thorough. I think it's important to understand what protection actually meant in this context. It wasn't about hiding or disappearing, it was about strategic visibility, being seen in the right places at the right times with the right people. It was about creating networks of mutual awareness, where community members looked out for each other, where warning systems were informal but effective. Protection was active, not passive. It required constant attention, constant adjustment, constant communication. What I keep coming back to is the psychological weight of this commandment. Living under these rules meant never fully relaxing, never assuming safety, never taking freedom for granted. It meant teaching children to be aware of dangers that shouldn't exist, to develop skills they shouldn't need. The commandment preserved lives, but it also revealed the incompleteness of freedom, the gap between legal emancipation and actual safety. Commandment 6 was the foundation. Protect your body and your community, because without physical survival, nothing else mattered. The rules that followed built on this base, but this was where everything started. I've shown you how it worked, how it was taught, how it was lived. What's crucial to understand is that this wasn't paranoia or exaggeration. The historical record supports every aspect of this commandment. The threats were real, the dangers were documented, and the people who followed these rules did so because experience had taught them the cost of not following them. I started this video by telling you that freedom didn't arrive evenly after slavery ended. What I hope you now understand is that freedom arrived without protection, and that created the need for these commandments. Commandment 6 taught people how to survive in a hostile world, how to protect themselves and each other when the law wouldn't do it. This was the first layer of protection, the most basic rule: stay alive. The commandments that follow, 7 and 8, build on this foundation, but they all start here, with the body, with survival, with the understanding that freedom means nothing if you're not alive to experience it.
Before we go any further, we need to stop and place ourselves in time. This is not the Civil War. That war is over. Slavery has been abolished on paper, and Reconstruction, the brief period of federal protection, has already collapsed. We are now standing in the decades between the Civil War and World War I. A dusty main street in a small American town, circa 1895. Horse-drawn carriages move slowly past wooden storefronts. Men in period clothing, some in worn military uniforms, walk with purpose but uncertainty. The atmosphere is full of tension. Come here, we're walking among the people somewhere between 1890 to 1915. This is a tense, unstable moment in American history. Across the country, people are returning from war, trained in violence, familiar with weapons, and expecting opportunity, dignity, a place in the nation they fought for. But the welcome many expected never comes. Instead, promises shrink, protection fades, and the country begins tightening control. At the same time, Black communities are doing something remarkable. They are building towns, starting businesses, buying land, circulating their own money. A wooden town sign reading Mound Bayou, an all-Black town, stands proudly at the entrance to a well-organized community. Behind it, we see neat houses, a church steeple, and people going about their daily business. Children play in the street while adults conduct business. These are warm and hopeful times. Ooh, did we have a thriving community, creating schools, newspapers, and banks. Places like Mound Bayou are not accidents. They are deliberate acts of independence, and that independence creates fear. Because throughout American history, moments of uncertainty are often followed by moments of control. When people in power feel threatened economically, politically, or socially, the response is rarely generosity. It is regulation, surveillance, criminalization. This is the moment when law and order hardens into something else, not to protect everyone, but to manage certain populations. And it's in this exact space between promise and backlash that Commandments 6 and 7 take on their full meaning. Build honest businesses because no one else will do it for you. Know the law because the law will be used whether you understand it or not. This isn't about nostalgia, and it's not about modern politics. It's about recognizing a pattern that shows up whenever a society is under strain. History doesn't repeat word for word, but it does return to familiar strategies. And once you see that, the rest of this story starts to make sense. Let's stop here. Go back and explain something. Everything we're about to talk about happens inside that moment, a time when freedom existed on paper, but survival still required strategy. That's why Commandments 6 and 7 emerged together, because economic independence and legal awareness were never separate. Commandment 6, thou shalt build honest businesses, trade with one another, and keep the black dollar in the black community. After slavery, Black people did what freedom demanded. They worked, they saved, they built. Businesses were opened, land was purchased, communities traded with one another. This wasn't theoretical, it was real, measurable progress. Sharecropping was presented as opportunity, a way to work, land, earn income, and eventually get ahead. But here's what rarely gets explained clearly. If you tried to leave a sharecropping plantation, you could be arrested, not metaphorically, not unofficially, legally. If a landowner claimed you owed money and the books were controlled by the landowner, that accusation alone could trigger arrest. That's when an honest business arrangement stopped being business. Debt became leverage. Contracts became traps, and labor became compulsory again. Not through chains at first, but through paperwork. This is why Commandment 6 mattered. Build honest businesses, but understand that honesty alone would not protect you. That's why money had to circulate inside the community, because outside systems were designed to extract, not support. Places like Mound Bayou didn't just happen. They were intentional acts of economic self-defense, and they were watched closely. Soft transition, do not rush. And when economic control wasn't enough, the law stepped in. Commandment 7, thou shalt study the law, claim your rights, and organize for justice in the courts and at the ballot box. After Reconstruction collapsed, the law hardened. New rules appeared quietly and quickly. Vagrancy laws, labor contract laws, curfews, loitering laws. You could be arrested for leaving a job, not having proof of employment, owing money you were never meant to repay, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Once arrested, the system moved fast. Fines were issued. Fees were added. Court costs piled on. And here's the part people miss. The fines were designed to be unpayable. So when someone couldn't pay, which was almost always, the sentence became labor. Not rehabilitation, not justice, labor. This is where incarceration became slavery by another name. The law allowed it. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. That single sentence created a loophole, and the system drove straight through it. People were leased by the state to plantations, mines, railroads, turpentine camps. The state made money. Private businesses got free labor, and the people caught inside lost their freedom again. The story that proves this didn't end in the 1800s. This system didn't disappear quickly. It stretched into the early 20th century before World War I. One documented example is Green Cottenham. In 1908, Green Cottenham was arrested in Alabama on a vague charge. He was convicted, leased out, and forced to work under brutal conditions on a plantation. This was not Reconstruction. This was the modern era. Green Cottenham did not walk free. He died inside the system. That's why the idea of a last slave is complicated. Because when slavery hides behind the law, it doesn't announce when it ends. Why Commandments 6 and 7 could never be separate economic independence without legal protection was temporary. Legal rights without economic power were fragile. That's why these commandments were paired. Build, but expect resistance. Know the law because it will be used whether you understand it or not. Organize because isolation made people easy targets. This wasn't pessimism, it was literacy. Personal reflection, keep it quiet, not emotional. This history matters because it explains something people still struggle to name. Why incarceration feels familiar. Why labor and punishment are still linked. Why systems repeat even when the language changes. This isn't about blaming individuals. It's about recognizing structures. Because you can't dismantle what you refuse to see. Forward pull sets up, next section. Commandments 6 and 7 explain how freedom had to be defended economically and legally at the same time. And in the next chapter, we'll talk about what happens when truth is distorted and memory is erased. Because once that happens, the cycle begins again. By the early 1900s, the system we've been talking about was fully in place. Slavery no longer announced itself. There were no auction blocks, no public chains. Instead, it hid. It hid behind court records, behind fines, behind prison sentences. And this is where the story of Green Cottenham begins. Green Cottenham was a black man living in Alabama. He was poor, he was vulnerable, and in that time, poverty itself could be treated as a crime. In 1908, Green Cottenham was arrested on a vague charge, the kind of charge that required no real evidence, vagrancy, loitering, failure to meet a labor expectation. Charges like these were common, they were designed to be. Once arrested, Green Cottenham was fined. On paper, the fine looked small. In reality, it was impossible to pay. And when he couldn't pay, the punishment changed. Not to release, not to rehabilitation, but to labor. Green Cottenham was leased out by the state, sold to a private employer. This was legal. If you're still with me right now, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. These stories are not taught the way they should be, and staying with them matters. Pause one beat, then continue. Convict leasing meant that prisoners were rented out to plantations, mines, lumber camps, turpentine camps. The state was paid, the business profited, and the prisoner worked without wages. Food was minimal, medical care was rare, punishment was constant. People were worked until they collapsed. Many never came home. Green Cottenham was sent into brutal labor conditions. He was not protected by law, because in this system, the law had already decided who he was. Not a citizen, not a worker, not a man with rights, but a body for labor. Green Cottenham died inside this system, not during the Civil War, not in 1865, but in 1908 in the 20th century. Green Cottenham is often described as one of the last enslaved men in America, not because he was the only one, but because his case was documented. There were others whose names were never recorded, others who disappeared into mines, camps, and fields. Slavery did not end all at once. It changed form. If this story is new to you, please hit the like button. It helps this history reach people who were never taught it. Green Cottenham's life forces an uncomfortable truth. If slavery ended on paper but continued through law, then freedom was conditional. This is why Commandments 6 and 7 mattered so deeply. Why people, built their own businesses, studied the law, warned one another, organized quietly. They understood the system had adapted. Green Cottenham did not leave speeches behind. He did not write books. What he left was evidence that injustice does not always look violent at first, evidence that systems can hide behind legality, evidence that silence allows harm to continue. And this raises a question we can't ignore. How did people endure knowing this could happen? How did families survive emotionally? How did communities hold together? The answer wasn't only economic, it wasn't only legal, it was spiritual, and that's where Commandment 8 Freedom begins. After slavery required more than jobs. It demanded more than money. It needed more than new laws written in distant capitals. These things were necessary components, of course, but they did not on their own possess the power to make a people whole. Emancipation on paper did not automatically grant the internal fortitude needed to navigate a hostile world. People needed courage to face the daily indignities. They needed protected spaces where they could organize and plan. They needed reliable channels to share vital information. They needed a spiritual home for their resilience. This is precisely why worship mattered so deeply in the aftermath of bondage. It is why we must understand Commandment 8, thou shalt worship freely. Use faith as a source of strength and courage. Never permit it to become a chain. It recognizes that true liberation is not merely a political or economic state, it is a spiritual and psychological one. The end of chattel slavery did not end the systemic efforts to dehumanize and control Black people. The fight for dignity had to be waged on internal and external fronts simultaneously. Faith in the post-slavery era was not an abstract theological concept. It was not solely concerned with the promise of a distant heaven. It was, for all practical purposes, about the immediate and pressing realities of life on earth. It was about how a newly freed people could keep moving forward day after grueling day. The churches that sprang up across the South were much more than houses for singing and prayer. They functioned as multi-purpose community centers, meeting rooms, makeshift schools, crucial safe havens. In these humble buildings, people gathered to learn the alphabet, a skill deliberately denied to them under slavery. They convened to discuss labor contracts. They strategized against exploitation by landowners seeking to replicate the old system. These sacred spaces became the incubator for political and economic empowerment. Within their walls, people met to pool their meager resources, benevolent societies, mutual aid groups, support through sickness, unemployment, death. They discussed the law, deciphering its complexities and sharing information about their rights. They met to issue warnings about specific dangers. In a time when the state offered little protection, the church became a self-sufficient home base, often the first major institution owned and controlled by the Black community. A typical worship service in a Black church during this period contained many layers. An outside observer might have seen only prayers, sermons, hymns. They would have witnessed the powerful emotional release of song and the solemnity of scripture readings. But beneath the surface of these familiar rituals, something more was happening. The pulpit was not only a place for theological discourse, it was a platform for disseminating critical information. A lesson about the Israelites' escape from Egypt was also a lesson about the possibility of liberation from present-day oppression. The sermon was a vital source of news and analysis. Beyond the sermon, the service itself was structured to facilitate practical action. They taught the community how contracts worked, warning them about the pitfalls of sharecropping agreements designed to entrap them in debt. They taught people what to do if a sheriff appeared at their door. They taught people what to do if a planter's agent appeared at their door. They provided detailed information about which towns were safe for travel and which were known hotspots for white supremacist violence. This was not a deviation from worship, it was an integral part of it. profit. The collection plate was often about more than just maintaining the church building. It was a mechanism for pooling money to help a family facing an immediate crisis. These funds served as an informal insurance system. The faith that took root in the post-slavery era was not a quiet, passive thing. It was not a gentle suggestion to turn the other cheek in the face of brutal injustice. It was a steady, disciplined practice of resistance. It was a spiritual discipline that cultivated inner strength. The songs, the sermons, and the prayers gave people a vocabulary to name their suffering without internalizing the shame that their oppressors tried to attach to it. The biblical stories of bondage, exodus, and redemption reminded them that their current condition was not permanent. This hope was not a fantasy. It was a vital psychological weapon. When a system relies on humiliation and fear to maintain control, a mind fortified by faith is a significant threat. It nurtured their pride and sustained their will to fight for a better future for their children. On the contrary, it fueled that quest by insisting that God's justice must be made manifest here on earth. It was not a call for silent acceptance of all wrongs. It was not an instruction to wait patiently and indefinitely for change. On the contrary, faith provided the courage to act. It gave individuals a powerful way to declare, "I am not the caricature that others have made of me. I am a child of God, endowed with inherent value and inalienable rights." This is a profoundly dangerous idea to any social order that profits from keeping a group of people small, powerless, and exploitable. It is a declaration of spiritual independence that precedes and makes possible political and economic independence. When a community of people learns to make this declaration together, week after week, in a space they control, they become a formidable problem for the established order. Their faith is no longer just a private comfort. It has become a public force. The state and the informal systems of white supremacy that propped it up watched the rise of these independent black churches with growing alarm. Section 5. Why dignity became a target. The black church became a primary target for a simple and powerful reason. It was effective. It taught dignity. It built unity, fostering a spirit of self-reliance. These are the essential ingredients of social and political action. The architects of the post-Reconstruction South understood this with perfect clarity. A campaign of surveillance and suppression was launched against these religious institutions. The very act of gathering was viewed with suspicion. New ordinances restricted when and where black people could assemble. Surveillance often escalated into outright violence. The law itself was weaponized. Persecution often reinforced the church's role as the community's only truly safe space. The targeting was strategic, control people by breaking their spirit. Yet time and again, the embers glowed brighter. Section 6, the church as an information network. In an age before mass media was accessible to the rural poor and when literacy was a precious commodity, the church was the primary channel through which news and warnings flowed. Word of mouth, validated within a trusted congregation, moved with remarkable speed and efficiency. Which roads were safe, which patrols to avoid, which merchants cheated, and which contracts were dangerous. News of an unjust arrest or a planned lynching could be spread quickly, allowing the community to mobilize a response. The pulpit was, in effect, the community's news desk, and the preacher its most trusted anchor. It created a web of shared knowledge that made the community more resilient and harder to exploit. Section 7. the double-edged sword of belief. It is crucial, however, to acknowledge that faith can be, and often has been, used in destructive ways. While one strain of faith fueled resistance and the pursuit of justice, another was twisted into a tool for promoting silence and submission. There are times when religion is turned into a shackle, not a key. When people are told their suffering is divinely ordained, it betrays the true work of liberation. This perversion of faith serves the interests of the powerful, not the people. Some white patrons funded churches expecting messages of obedience and gratitude. Even without direct outside influence, some black ministers themselves adopted this theology of passivity. Whatever the motive, the result was the same, a faith that taught people to bow to harm rather than to stand up against it. This fault line is the very heart of Commandment 8. Worship freely. Use faith to cultivate strength, not endless obedience. It calls for a spirituality that heals oppression while giving people the courage to fight its sources. It demands that we teach our children to be brave, help each other in practical ways, hold one another, and act together when action is required. A faith that builds community, fosters dignity, and demands justice is the faith that keeps a people whole. Any other version is a counterfeit. Section 8. The transition to hidden chains. The old visible chains of slavery were being replaced by new, less visible ones. The state, determined to preserve hierarchy, shifted its tactics. A new era of mass incarceration began to dawn, targeting black men with alarming precision. Vague and discriminatory laws, vagrancy or loitering, were used to arrest people for being unemployed or simply in the wrong place. Exorbitant fines led to labor camps or convict leasing to private corporations. This practice was, in many ways, even more brutal than slavery. It created a direct economic motive to arrest as many black men as possible. Sharecropping contracts were indecipherable, designed to end each year in debt. Debt legally bound families to land, while courts almost invariably sided with the landowner. The law became a powerful instrument enforcing a new kind of servitude. The courage born in the church was met with the cold, calculating machinery of the carceral state. Faith gave them the language to name this new form of bondage, even when the state insisted it was justice. People on the ground knew that slavery had not truly ended. It had simply put on a new uniform, that of the prison guard and the county sheriff. Section 9, Faith, Fortitude, and the New Forms of Control. The networks built around the church were essential for sharing stories about these new forms of entrapment. A man who returned from a convict lease camp could share his testimony in the safety of the church community, warning others. The state used the language of law and order. In church, people could call it what it was, a new form of slavery. A person made in the image of God was less susceptible to psychological warfare, endure the ordeal, and emerge with self and justice intact. In conclusion, the foundation for the next fight, it is the story of how the legal system itself became the primary instrument of racial control. Courts that were used to bind labor, not to dispense justice. A system of law draped in the flag of fairness while perpetuating profound inequality. In Commandment 8, which is the key to understanding how people develop the strength to see the truth disguised as progress. Faith gave them the protected space to speak this truth to one another. Faith gave them the moral courage to name the harm. The fight against chattel slavery was against a visible enemy. The new fight was against a more elusive foe. Legal codes, court rulings, prison bars, judges, sheriffs, corporate bosses, the sprawling carceral state. Faith communities forged after slavery became the first line of defense. They were the places where the alarm was first sounded. Hold this rule close, worship freely. Use your faith not as an escape, but as a set of tools. Build a net of safety and solidarity for your people. Use it to teach. Use it to warn. Use it to organize. Use it to save. Do not ever allow faith to be used to silence you. Do not let it justify accepting endless harm. Your worship must remain brave. It must remain compassionate. It must remain true to the cause of liberation. This was one essential element that helped a people survive one form of bondage long enough to recognize and begin the fight against the next.